morning and welcome to Rugby Borough Council's Licensing Subcommittee this Tuesday the 5th of April. I am Councillor Julia Barrow, Chairman of the committee. The meeting is being web streamed to the public through the Council's YouTube channel. So during the meeting, if you wish to speak, please use the push to talk button on the microphone in front of you. This will allow the camera to pan in your general direction. Before we begin the formal agenda, I'm obliged to read out the following fire notice. There is no fire drill scheduled in the building. If the fire alarm sounds, then please could I ask that you make your way out of the building, down the main staircase and out of the main doors of the town hall, and congregate at the entrance to Caldecott Park. An officer of the council will give instructions on when it is safe to return to the building. I think it'd be useful if we did some introductions. As I've said, I'm Councillor Julia Barrow, I'm the chair. Just push to talk.
It's not going to. Should I just?
Yeah.
My name's Emma Payne. I'm the licensing officer presenting today.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen. My name's Andrew Bean. I'm councillor.
Perhaps you're on the other microphone.
Hello, I'm Councillor Sue Roodhouse, a member of the Licensing Committee.
Morning everyone, John Gregory, solicitor from White Hassel Solicitors.
Good morning, Thomas Palmer, Finance Director for Country House Weddings Limited.
Adam Morris, trainee solicitor at White Hassel.
Thank you, everyone. Moving on to the agenda, the first item of business is to receive declarations of interest. So to receive declarations for non-pecuniary interests as defined by the Council's Code of Conduct for councillors.
No.
Pecuniary interests as defined by the Council's Code of Conduct for councillors.
No.
And notice under Section 106 Local Government Finance Act 1992, non-payment of the community charge or council tax.
No.
So we just have one item on the agenda this morning, the consideration of the application for a new premises licence, Boughton Hall, Main Street, Boughton-on-Dunsmore, CV23 9QZ. I'll just go through generally the purpose and the proceedings this morning. The committee will allow all parties an equal maximum length of time to address the committee. The applicant to outline their case, and the committee shall then be invited to ask questions or seek clarification on any points if necessary. We don't have any interested parties with us in the room this morning. The Council's officer will also have the opportunity to ask questions and clarify any details. The applicant will then give evidence in support of their case, and the committee shall be invited to ask questions or seek clarification with regard to the applicant's evidence. The applicant and or their legal representative to make any closing remarks. We haven't got any interested parties. The subcommittee will remain in the room to deliberate and make its decision with only the legal officer remaining. All others present should be asked to leave. And at that point, the live streaming will be terminated. After all parties have been heard, the committee will determine the application in accordance with the requirements of the Licensing Act 2003 and the relevant regulation. The decision will be made at the conclusion of this hearing. If the decision cannot be made at the conclusion of this hearing, the decision will be made within 5 working days of this date, and you will be advised of the decision of this committee in writing. Thank you. So, Mr.
Chair,
Yeah.
if I could just confirm that all the relevant notices were notices for today's hearing and the notices in respect of the application were all dealt with and served. Thank you.
Mr. Gregory, if you would like to outline the case, please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, as I just said, I'm a licensing solicitor with White Hassall, and I represent Boughton Hall Limited today. And to my right is Thomas Palmer, Finance Director at Boughton Hall Limited, and he'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have today about the day-to-day operation of the premises. Now, members may be familiar with these premises. They were licensed by this council back in 2020, but by way of background, Boughton Hall is a Grade 2 listed building dating back to 1791. It sits within 16 acres of gardens and parkland, and on the north side is a large car park with around 120 car parking spaces. However, you'll see from the plan that it's only Boughton Hall itself which is licensed and not the grounds or outbuildings. The premises have been vacant for some time prior to the original application, and the building had been used as commercial offices before being restored by the owners and licensed by the council back in December 2020. Since then, they've been operated as a premium wedding venue and have been extremely popular with couples. Notably, there's been no need for intervention by environmental health, the licensing authority or the police during that time. Now, you can see from the plan with your papers that the ground floor of the premises consists of the reception and entertaining areas.
Can you tell us what page?
I think the plan is within Appendix A of your current papers, but I think confusingly it's within internal Appendix B of those documents. I think if you turn to page 24, within that appendix you should see the plan. Have you found that? Slightly confusing because it has its own appendices within the report, yeah.
Just carry on.
So it's labelled Appendix A within Appendix B of the main report, somewhat confusingly. There's a page number 24 and then the plan follows directly after that. If it assists, I can hand over my copy. Yeah, that's fine. Oh, there you go. So the ground floor of the premises consists of the reception and entertaining areas, including the dining room, main bar and disco area. And the first and second floor of the premises comprise the guest accommodation. And I think I'm right in saying there's 15 guest bedrooms. Licensable activities are confined to the main bar and the bar disco area, and they consist of the sale of alcohol and food and the playing of music. So essentially the usual activities you would expect to find at a wedding venue. Now, it's clear, members, just to be clear about the scope of this application, the premises already benefit from a premises licence and they can continue operating as they have been, whatever your decision today. The only effect of you deciding to grant this application is that the premises will be able to open until midnight on Sundays rather than having to close at 11 p.m. All other restrictions and conditions will remain in place. And members will note there have been no representations from either the police or environmental health. And in my submission, this is testament to the manner in which the venue is operated. And it's evidence that they have no concerns about this application in terms of either noise nuisance or crime and disorder. Now, there has been a representation from the council in its capacity as local planning authority and two from members of the public, and I'll address these briefly in turn. So first, the representation from the local planning authority. Now, the basis of this is that the condition on the planning permission for the premises, which restricts amplified or unamplified music to the ground floor of the building, whereas the premises licence differs slightly in that it allows for music to be played outside up until 5 p.m. if it is played as an accompaniment to a ceremony. So, for example, a string quartet playing during the wedding ceremony would be permitted under the licence. Now, there are 3 points to make about the LPA submission. First, you'll no doubt be aware that planning and licensing are separate statutory regimes. It's perfectly legitimate, and indeed nearly always the case, that a planning permission and a premises licence will have different conditions. Planning decisions are informed by planning policy and guidance, whereas premises licence are decided solely on the basis of the 4 licensing objectives. So whatever your decision today, the conditions on the planning permission will have to be adhered to by the applicant, but it's not necessary for those conditions on the planning permission and the licensing consent to mirror each other. Second, the effect of this application is only to extend the opening hours by 1 hour from 11 p.m. to midnight on Sundays. So the condition on the licence prohibits the playing of any music after 5 p.m. And so the LPA's comments really have no bearing whatsoever on the decision you have to make today about the extra hour on Sundays. Third, in any event, it's questionable that the planning condition does in fact prohibit music that accompanies wedding ceremonies. The condition is worded so as to specifically prohibit music provided as entertainment. Whilst this would include a band or a DJ, in my submission, it probably doesn't cover music provided as accompaniment to a ceremony, where the music is not provided as entertainment but only as incidental music. Your colleagues on the licensing panel which granted the existing licence, as well as the Council's own Environmental Health Department, decided back in 2020 that it's perfectly acceptable for music to be played as an accompaniment to ceremonies up until 5 p.m. outside. There's been no change in circumstances since then that would justify departing from that view now, and in my submission, a condition preventing incidental wedding ceremony music being played before 5 p.m. at a bespoke venue would be unreasonable and disproportionate. Turning now to public comments, and first to those made by Alison and Robert Jack, and that's in Appendix E of your papers. Now, they state that they're keen to ensure that the outdoor music will cease at 5 p.m. And that the conditions attached to the original approval will remain in place, and they can be reassured on both fronts. All of the conditions of the original licence are to remain in place, save for the one restricting the sale of alcohol to 11 p.m. on Sundays, including the prohibition on any outdoor music after 5 p.m. They also raised concerns about potential noise caused by people leaving the premises. And I think in this respect, it's important to note that wedding venues are markedly different from pubs. Guests will be at the premises by invitation only, and they'll invariably either stay overnight or go straight on to pre-booked accommodation by private taxi or car. It's not a case where people will finish at the wedding and then go walking home through residential areas. The premises are already open until midnight on every other day of the week, and there's no evidence before you to the effect that this has given rise to any public nuisance. The premises is also open till midnight on Sundays on several occasions under temporary event notices, and again there's been no complaint received in relation to that opening. The second public representation, members, has been submitted by Mr Brown, also in Appendix E. Mr Brown makes comments about a member of the licensing panel which granted the original licence, which has no bearing on your decision today, and that's correctly pointed out in your report. It's also suggested by Mr Brown that the applicant should have to earn the trust of the residents before this application can be granted. Well, firstly, that's simply not the case. There is no legal requirement for the applicants to have to demonstrate anything other than the promotion of the licensing objectives. And further, it should be noted that the premises have operated for over a year now in a perfectly responsible manner, hence the lack of representation from either the police or environmental health. So the applicant has certainly proved themselves to be a more than capable operator. Mr Brown also raises concern about fireworks. However, the setting off of fireworks, firstly, is not a licensable activity, but secondly, wouldn't take place between the hours of 11 p.m. And midnight in any circumstances, so it's not relevant to the extra hour that's been applied for today. It's also suggested in that representation that the applicants were somehow remiss in displaying only one A4 blue notice when advertising the application. But of course, the applicant does not get a choice over this. The application has been advertised in accordance with the statutory requirements with a standard blue notice in the form prescribed by the legislation and through a newspaper advertisement. Again, I think that's dealt with in your report. Turning briefly now to the licensing objectives more generally, unless you have specific questions, I don't propose to address you on crime and disorder or the protection of children from harm or the promotion of public safety. There are no representations in respect of these. As regards public nuisance, you'll see on page 15 of Appendix A to your papers that the operating schedule contains several conditions aimed at preventing noise issues. These include a limit on the decibel levels of any music played, the regular monitoring of noise levels and a requirement that external doors and windows must be kept closed during the playing of music. There's also a requirement for notices to be displayed reminding guests to leave quietly and for a member of staff to be on duty from 11:30 p.m. to assist people with this. It's of course highly significant that the premises have been operating effectively since December 2020, so you've kind of had a trial run, and that the Council's Environmental Health Department deems the application to be acceptable. And in my submission, there's simply no evidence before you members which indicates that nuisance would be caused by allowing this modest extension of hours. Members, unless I can assist you further, that's all I have to say by way of introduction and in relation to the representations made, but we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Gregory. Do we have questions, councillors?
I do have two. There might be for... You're Mr Gregory, aren't you? And you're Mr Palmer, which... Yes, okay, for the gentleman from Borton Hall. Is that Mr Gregory?
That's Mr Palmer.
That's Mr Palmer. Okay, so Mr Palmer, so how many weddings do you have on a Sunday? Do you have many?
So we only hold one wedding. Yes, sorry. The wedding venue is exclusive use, so we only hold one wedding per day. We've held approximately 100 weddings since mid-June to the end of March. So however many Sundays are in between there. So I'd say most Sundays we hold a wedding.
And why did you really want the extra hour? What difference does that make?
It's more so for our couples. It's a common requirement for couples to extend until midnight. We have, I think our current licence allows us to go to midnight Monday to Saturday. Midnight on a Sunday as a weekend is what our couples have requested from us.
Thank you.
Chair, thank you, Chair. Councillor Roodhouse has actually asked some of the questions I was going to ask, but I do have one or two others. I wonder, could you advise, please, I'm not quite sure which gentleman it would be to answer, but is Borton Hall the only location in the Country House Wedding group that is applying for these extra hours on a Sunday?
It is the only venue in the group that's applying for the extra hour on a Sunday. The other venues that we've got, the 5 venues in the group, have actually got hours that extend to midnight.
So your other locations already have the hours
Yes.
that you're applying for with this site?
That's right, yeah.
Right, okay, thank you. In terms of the weddings on a Sunday, I mean, are they in a marquee or something outside? I'm just trying to get to grips with how that is on.
Yeah.
I don't know Borton Hall,
No,
so I
that's
ask
fine.
naive questions. But
No, that's fine. That's not a problem. So Borton Hall is self-contained. So the ceremony spaces, the 2 or 3 ceremony spaces that we've got at Borton Hall are actually accessible via the main building. The only time that anybody would be outside would be to have a ceremony outside, if the weather is suitable, or for the sake of going outside to socialise with family and friends. So the actual the ceremony itself, most of them take place inside, unless they're outside ceremonies, and then all of the actual entertainment will take place inside.
Just on that, if it helps, there is a condition that restricts all music to the ground floor of the internal area of the premises, so there couldn't be a marquee outside with a DJ or anything like that.
And one final question. I think Mr. Gregory mentioned that there are approximately 15 rooms there. Some weddings I've been to when I were a lad had 100-odd people there. That would suggest to me that some, in fact, would be going to get in cars, taxis and such like to depart to go home. I mean, that thought doesn't quite square with what you
No, Councillor, sorry if I wasn't clear on that. So my point on that was that you're quite right. People will be using local accommodation, but usually people at weddings will get into a car or taxi straight away, rather than as opposed to a pub where you might walk home through the local area. So I think in terms of people leaving and then heading into the local residential area, that is unlikely to happen. People are more likely to get into cars, go straight to the hotel that they're staying at, rather than to, say, walk through the village looking for somewhere else to go or walk home.
And a final question, if I may. I think under the late night refreshment heading, which I think is totally new for a Sunday, isn't it? Commensurate with the extra hour. I might be being naive, but what are we actually talking about there? Is that more alcohol, spirits, or is it food and sandwiches for guests who are staying there, or for those who are about to depart?
Yeah, so late night hot food sales are required to be licensed after 11 o'clock only. So the licence will allow the sale of hot food between 11 p.m. and midnight. It's not required to be licensed up until 11 p.m. But Mr. Palmer might be able to help in terms of what kind of food that might be.
Yeah, so food, hot food around that time would be more like midnight munchies, you know, sausage rolls, cheese on toast, those sort of things, just snacks at that time of night. The food element tends to stop a lot earlier than that. It's normally around about 10 o'clock, if I'm honest. The buffet food in the evening might go out around 7, 8 o'clock and then be taken away by 10 o'clock. So this is more the actual provision of the music and the alcohol within that hour, as opposed to the food.
Thank you, Chair.
You mentioned that there were no environmental health issues or complaints to the police. I wondered, are you aware of any complaints have been made directly to the management of Boughton Hall?
We've had some interaction with local residents concerning any sort of concern they might have, which they might have brought up during this process. Everything seems to have been amicable. Any issues that there may have been, as far as I'm aware, have been resolved. We feel quite strongly about building a good relationship with the local residents. Because we are there in their home, in their local area, but we like to work with them not just because we want to be considerate to their needs, but also because we might be able to provide an element of employment towards the local area. They may be guests of our weddings, they may actually be getting married at Boughton Hall. So we like to engage with the local residents as much as we can.
And there was one occasion at least where environmental health have been out and that complaint was found to be unfounded, is that right?
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, there was one occasion where environmental health actually came out regarding a noise complaint, but there wasn't actually a wedding on that particular night. So, again, as far as I'm aware, it was a local resident as actually having a party as opposed to any noise coming from the venue itself.
If I could just continue with this, I obviously realise that we've all been under these restrictions, so we've not been operating for the last 12 months under normal conditions. But we're all sitting here today because residents in Boughton have objected to the variation of the licence. So going forward, it would be nice to see a relationship developing between the Boughton Hall management and the local residents. And I say I appreciate it's been difficult these last 12 months, but how would a resident contact you in the first instance?
A local resident can, if there isn't a wedding on, they can walk on site and come into the office and come into the venue, and we'll sit down and speak with them. But it would be best if they actually make contact first via phone or telephone to actually get more of a formal appointment to engage with any concerns they may have. We are we've had contact from local residents regarding contribution towards local amenities, which we are assisting with, a defibrillator in the local vicinity to assist with residents if there's any trouble. We have committed to contribute towards that. So we'll try and do anything that we can to help the local area within reason, but to be able to find out what the needs are, they can telephone or email in.
Chair, again, if I could just assist on that as well, there is, in our operating schedule, we've included a requirement that a telephone number is displayed at the front of the premises during weddings, so that if members of the public want to complain about noise nuisance during an event, there's a telephone number there for them to ring, and the applicant has to use reasonable endeavours to provide somebody to answer that call and deal with it. So that's one means of contact. The other point I'd just make about the objections is that there were, in relation to the original application, numerous objections, numerous representations, and that has reduced significantly to 2 in relation to this application. So I think that is quite telling.
Thank you. Councillor Byrne.
Chair, could I just ask one more question, please? Just going back to the topic of those guests who would be leaving and not staying in the hotel on a Sunday night. The licence you're applying for goes to midnight, and I guess, according to the documents here, they have a half hour, what used to be called a drinking up time. So that could be, just to spell out perhaps the obvious, that some people would be coming out sometime after 12:30 on a Monday morning and then getting into vehicles to depart off home. Is that correct?
Yeah, the premises closing time is 12:30. You're exactly right. So during that period from midnight to 12:30 is when people would be leaving the premises. As I say, there are signs reminding people to leave quietly. There's also a member of staff that needs to be on duty as people walk out the door to help them and to remind them to leave with respect to any neighbours. I don't think there's a map included with the papers, correct me if I'm wrong, but that shows the location of the 2 representations premises in relation to the premises, but you'll note that they're probably far enough away not to be concerned with the noise of people getting into cars.
That was going to be one of my questions, actually, the location of the nearest domestic residence to where the music and such like would be being played.
Again, this might be one for Mr. Palmer, but he'll correct me if I'm wrong, but the nearest residential premises haven't made any representations in relation to this, and those that have made representations are probably out of earshot of a car door, but Mr. Palmer may be able to help with where the nearest residential premises are.
Yeah. So the actual point within the building where the music is allowed to take place is on the opposite side of the village, in an enclosed space with closed windows and doors, so that we don't lose any element of sound, and that has been tested by a local company to ensure that we fall within range of the acceptable levels within the previous approved licence. The closest residence is probably, let's say, 200 to 300 yards away from the main building, and then the actual the disco room is on the opposite side of that.
Have you had to erect any screening measures to stop noise? For
No,
example,
no, not
trees
at
or
all.
these barriers like you see on motorways, to stop the noise going to the houses, anything along that lines?
No, none at all. I was there when they carried out the sound testing, putting microphones around the edge of the property, also in the garden of the nearest property, and you couldn't, from my point of view, hear anything within 100 yards or less from the actual area where the disco itself was taking place. And from, again, as far as I'm concerned, the test was carried out at the highest possible decibel levels way beyond the approved levels that we operate within.
Emma, as the licensing officer, have you got anything you would like to ask at this point?
I'm actually quite happy that Mr Gregory's covered everything that I would have. So, yeah, I'm happy.
So you don't want to add anything to this proceedings this morning at all? Okay. Mr Gregory, is there any other evidence that you want to outline to us?
Not unless members have further questions, no.
Marion, did you want to?
No, no. Well, councillors, I made detailed submissions earlier, so I don't propose to repeat those. In my submission, you've been presented with no evidence that any of the licensing objectives would be undermined by the grant of this licence. On the other hand, the grant of the licence helps to ensure that the premises can cater for the needs of their clients and remain economically sustainable. The operation of the premises as a wedding venue has secured the restoration and preservation of the listed building. It's been extremely popular, but it does remain an economically uncertain time for the licensed trade, even at this stage of the pandemic. It's imperative in my submission that restrictions on opening hours are not imposed without very good reason, and it's not unreasonable in my submission to expect licences to run till midnight for the purposes of a wedding at a specialist venue. So for those reasons, I respectfully invite you to grant the licence in accordance with the proposed conditions. Thank you.
Okay, that would seem to conclude our business this morning, unless anyone in the room has anything further to add or query.
Sorry, just
Okay.
one question. I'm assuming that you are also holding weddings on a Saturday as well, or have things moved on from my time 46 years ago and it was always a Saturday? Things have suddenly changed somewhere.
We, across the group and depending on the time of the year, we actually hold weddings Monday to Sunday, which is logistically challenging, to say the least. But at the same time, it's, you know, the market is there for weddings to take place during those times, and especially between the summer months, it can be very, very busy indeed. But then similarly, come the later parts of the year, it does ease off. But it's the nature of the wedding industry that it, you know, is very seasonal.
Okay, if I could ask that the live streaming is stopped now, please, and if you would...